I'm Mike Bradner, and this is Capital Views. And we have with us today Nils Andreassen, who is the director of the Institute of the North. And Nils, there's been a lot happening nationally in terms of our presence in the Arctic, and we're an Arctic nation, thanks to Alaska, and but we're the Arctic state. And but what's going on in the federal-state relationship that is?
There's a lot going on in that relationship. I think that what we see from the federal government is a huge amount of attention being paid to the Arctic right now. The Coast Guard has a strategy, the Department of Defense came out with its Arctic strategy, the US has an Arctic strategy. All of those call for greater cooperation and collaboration with the state of Alaska and with many of the stakeholders across the state. How that happens and when and what that looks like when it does, I'm not quite sure. I don't think that that's really been well articulated. I know that the state has a huge role and responsibility in addressing Arctic issues, and it has to be a partner.
And that's what's sort of being defined now. I mean, there's sort of working with the issue and trying to define whose role is what, and we offer a lot of science, and the science is a big item nationally. I think global warming and things like that. But in terms of physical things that might be placed in Alaska, like ports, basically the strategy is more emphasis just towards what, coastal security. And
I think so. That's the trend at the Arctic Council level. That's been the trend within the federal government, is focused on maritime activity, increased maritime activity in response to change and globalization. You've got a lot more destinational shipping going through the Bering Sea, the Bering Strait. Not at levels that occurred during the Cold War, but still increasing. And so a lot of the attention is focused on how do we do this safely, how do we do this responsibly, how do we manage risk. And I think for Alaskans, the state is concerned but capable. It's got a lot of experience in working on Arctic issues, and it needs to be valued as such.
Now, initially, we're talking about destinational shipping that's passing by from perhaps the Far East, to Europe, which is much shorter than, which is hard to grasp. I mean, you can't quite believe that going north and around the globe, it takes people a little effort to get their hands around that one, how it could be so much shorter.
So a lot of the attention should be on the Northern Sea route and use of that as a potential shipping route for goods coming back and forth from Europe or northern Russia really, to Asian markets. For destinational shipping, we're mostly talking about mining activity, and as sea ice extent decreases, we're going to have more access, more shipping. The biggest argument for economic development is to put in place the correct response capacity. So that's all about infrastructure along the coast. We've heard a lot of talk about a deep draft port on the Seward Peninsula. We've heard a lot of talk about icebreakers, but really it's building up response along the coast.
All kinds of
response,
ability. The developments in the Seward Peninsula would be Port Clarence or
Nome, or some shared agreement between the two. Basically a forward presence for the Coast Guard, for DOD, for others, for search and rescue.
And we think of ports on the West Coast. It's, what's lacking is ports that have shelter. Natural ports that give shelter from the weather, where you might secure ships. And
we did a port and airport assessment for the Arctic Council last year, and plenty of ports or barge landings, plenty of marine infrastructure. Some would say that there's only one deep real port in the Arctic, in Murmansk. We're at a similar level as other Arctic nations. Everybody needs more infrastructure.
So in Canada, the Canadian Arctic Islands, and also along the Russian North Sea coast, they're somewhat like us. They have shallow, you may see bays and so on, but they really don't offer much
Well, I think just at this point they don't have the built infrastructure that's needed. A lot of communities along the coast, a lot of some activity taking place, but just not the infrastructure. And whether it's icebreakers or other response assets, hangars, etc. It's a very difficult environment to operate in, and for as much as we like to think that it's changing and changing quickly, there's a lot of that's way into the future in a lot of ways.
So we have established infrastructure at Dutch Harbor on
Yep.
Alaska, and that's likely to be where we start.
It's a great starting point. Yeah.
And then you have to figure out what you can do where.
Yeah.
And of course, we're looking for some outports that would provide development in Alaska,
Yeah.
and that's a matter of what you have where and how you get it out.
Yep.
The core focus here is basically on what our interests are and national interests are, and they're a little different, but it's our job to do what? To try to generate the national interest and the broader interest.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that one of the things that we don't hear often enough from Washington is economic development, and that's the state. That should be the state's priority: economic development, which should be coupled with responsible management of resource development, environmental safeguards, protection for communities and society. So all that's mixed in there together.
Nils, we're out of time, and this is Capital Views. I'm Mike Bradner, and we've been talking to Nils Andreassen, who is the director of the Institute of the North.
Thanks, Mike.